You can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific. And how?
Lex has invited Clark and Lana to a charity gala in Metropolis. The gala is featuring a breastplate that was said to be worn by Alexander the Great, who, unbeknownst to us until now, was actually the first Superman. I guess Kryptonians were coming to Earth all the way back in the 300s BC and handing out their family crest to world conquerors. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's apparently just a coincidence that it looks like the S-Shield for another of those ever-so-clever Smallville foreshadowing moments, so that Clark can say within the first minute of the show, I just can't see myself going into battle with that on my chest. That's made even weirder by the sheer number of times the actual S-Shield shows up in later seasons. But I digress. Clark conveniently happens to be the only person outside when a man driving a Metro bus has a heart attack, and Clark stops the bus from plowing into any buildings by slamming right into the front of it. Miraculously, this doesn't crush every bone in the driver's body, but it's easy to be distracted into not noticing this, as the musical score just after this sounds oddly like a Zales jewelry commercial. Clark thinks no one saw him, but later he discovers he's dead wrong when a dirty Metropolis detective named Sam Phelan, who has something to do with Lex's sordid past, dun-dun-dun, drops a generator on Clark in his barn to confirm what he saw, and then blackmails Clark into being his personal super slave, threatening to tell the world about him, and on numerous occasions threatening his family. Jonathan tries to get him to back off, but Phelan goats him into making a scene at the beanery, and it doesn't work. Phelan forces Clark to help him steal incriminating files from internal affairs, and in an uncharacteristically bold move, Clark drops the safe on Phelan's car, calls the police, hands him the file, and super speeds away. Man, where has this Clark been this whole series? This guy's entertaining. People should threaten his family a little more often. There are a couple other subplots happening during all this. One, Chloe being fired from the Torch for printing stories about Kryptofreaks, which are surprisingly absent for the first time this week. And when Lana gets her job while trying to help Chloe get her job back, Chloe goes on an obnoxious tirade that prior to this I might have thought was beneath her. And secondly, Lex is visited by an old flame, Victoria Hardwick, an English rich girl trying to gain control of LuthorCorp to impress her father. So, alas, Phelan magically gets out of the safe jam off screen, the only explanation being Phelan's line, "You never go into a crack house with one plan, you go in with 10, that's how you survive." And then he retaliates by planting a dead body on Jonathan's farm and evidence that points to Jonathan as the killer. Jonathan goes to jail, Clark gets super angry and thinks really hard about killing Phelan, and when he doesn't, Phelan promises he'll make everything go away if he'll help him with one more job, stealing the breastplate from Luthor Hall. Clark goes with him, Phelan distracts the police with a fake bomb, Clark steals the breastplate, and then double-crosses Phelan by throwing it outside for the police to find, with Phelan's fingerprints all over it. Phelan gets killed in a big police shootout, Lana gets Chloe her job back, Lex sees the security footage of a blur zooming past during the incident, dun-dun-dun, and then credits. Last week's episode, Jitters, was good because it managed to do something compelling within the formula. Rogue is good because it goes against it. There's no Kryptofreak, no superpowers, besides Clark's, of course, and the conflict, gasp, isn't about a homicidal maniac. 2 in a row, what are the odds? And again, the drama comes mostly from family elements. This is a really interesting idea to explore, a man with power who tries to exploit Clark's powers for his own uses, and it's handled fairly well. What makes it work is that we see Clark more vulnerable than we ever have, and the threat isn't supernatural. Clark could kill Phelan anytime he wants to, and he's pushed so far he really does want to, but that wouldn't solve his problem, because his father would still be in jail, and the only man who could get him off would be dead. And guess what? After the countless times Clark's been infected with kryptonite, okay, it's not countless, I've been counting. So, after the 14 times we've seen Clark affected by kryptonite, seeing him writhing around on the floor in pain, seeing his veins pop and turn that sick green, I'm more worried about him here than I have any of those times, because this hits him personally and shows a true weakness, but the weakness that actually gives him potential for becoming the selfless hero he's supposed to be later on. As Ursa says in Superman 2, he cares. He actually cares for these creatures. We've really always taken for granted that Superman needs the secret identity of Clark Kent, as much because we figure he probably wants to get to be a regular guy sometimes instead of always flying around saving people as anything else. This episode episode really effectively emphasizes why Clark's secret identity is necessary. Had he been wearing a disguise when he stopped the bus, Phelan would never have known who to go after. I'm glad we don't get just one token episode where this happens either. We'll get to others in later episodes also who want to exploit Clark's gifts. As much flack as I give Smallville in a lot of places for lazy writing and lack of common sense, this is an example of the show being really smart. A kid in a relatively small town that keeps showing up at crime scenes is bound to start drawing attention sooner or later, and a lot of his powers are physically spectacular and hard to hide when he uses them, which is why so many convenient plot devices are needed so people don't see him perform these feats. And this also makes Phelan a real frightening menace. As Clark says when Martha suggests they call the police, he is the police. He has the power to hurt people Clark cares about without reprisal, and there's really nothing stopping him from using Clark again and again, despite promises that this will be the last time. Compare that to Kryptofreak after Kryptofreak that gets a power, has a motif, can more easily kill people now than they ever could, so they do whatever they want, often something that seems strange to kill somebody over, or else those other Kryptofreaks like in Cool and Craving, who have to kill to survive. They're threats, sure, but they don't provide much internal conflict or character dimension for our protagonist. The best villains are those who bring something out of the protagonist, who help to teach him something about himself, like Khan and Captain Kirk. Phelan helps Clark realize that he has his father's temper somewhere inside of him. He's very surprised when it comes out, and it's terrifying because he knows if he can't control himself, people will most certainly be hurt. Not to mention he'll blow his secret to the world. It's a tense moment when Clark smashes a wooden beam in his house after his father's hauled away to jail. And then when Phelan shows up and Clark grabs him, wanting to kill him. And it's nearly impossible to believe when earlier he has the chutzpah to drop the safe on Phelan's car and double-cross him, actually trying to solve his problems in a smart way rather than crying about them. This isn't the stereotypical whiny teenager pining away for the girl next door that we've seen before. There's a lot more to the Clark in this episode, and I'd like to see him more in the future. I think the best scene in the episode is when Clark is talking to Jonathan in jail, and we see, very naturally, how similar to Jonathan Clark really is. Jonathan says, "I know all there is to know about losing your temper, but you can't afford to do it. Once you cross that line, there's no going back." Seeing Clark face the temptation to kill is a great foundation for the man he's supposed to become, who won't kill at any cost. This also begins a theme with Jonathan and Clark we'll see a lot after this, when Jonathan says, "You always have a choice." True, but difficult to hear in such a complicated and precarious situation. This is real rather than manufactured drama, and it's what the series should have been much, much more at the time. We're getting a neat peek into the corporate intrigue of Lex's life here, a world where the rules are a little different than those in Clark's. Lex will sleep with Victoria just to find out what she's up to, knowing she's working for her father and trying to manipulate him somehow. They plot and scheme to take over both companies, but it's pretty evident that Lex has more up his sleeve than just partnering with this girl to go against Lionel. I love seeing this part of Lex's world, and he's also especially suave and cool this episode. Some of the best lines probably look a lot duller on the page until Rosenbaum says them. Like when Phelan is looking for Clark and shows him a picture of the two of them together and he casually says, "Sorry, I don't know who that is." Or when he tells Victoria that her father has always had an incredible grasp of the obvious. There's also more interesting how much does Lex really care about Clark stuff, with his advising Clark to stay away from Phelan, but simultaneously trying to find out what Phelan has on him in his continuing, desperate quest to find out how Clark saved him on the bridge. I even like Lana this episode. She and Clark both take risks I never would have expected based on their prior behavior. This is one of the very few times I find Chloe completely ridiculous and Lana 100% sensible. This Clark and this Lana I could get behind. Well, the love triangle virus is already striking, as generally rational characters turn ridiculous just to remind us that our two main gals are interested in Clark at the same time. It does make sense that she's angry, but characters making huge scenes, bursting into tears and walking off in the middle of a conversation, don't worry, I counted it, make me appreciate their plight a whole lot less. Lana gets the torch, which she doesn't want, just trying to help, and Chloe, with really no reason to think this, decides this was all an elaborate plan to push Clark out of her life. And you know, they're in 9th grade, maybe kids that age act like this sometimes, but it just doesn't make for good story. I don't care what age they are or how realistic this might be in fiction, characters we're supposed to care about don't have to be this whiny. Plus, there's plenty going on in the A story and with Lex's B story that this is entirely unnecessary, and luckily it's not enough of the episode to bring the whole thing down. Again, I'm surprised by how cool-headed and good to her friend Lana's being, and I just feel like the episode throws Chloe under the bus in order to make Lana more likable. What's with these huge close-ups on people's faces? I know there's a lot of talking heads in this show, but it's starting to get kind of ridiculous. And questions to ask Jarrell when I get to heaven. Just one, does Phelan have more hours in his day than the average human being? Is he maybe really a Kryptofreak and that's his power? I get that Phelan's an experienced dirty cop who knows how to get out of tough situations, but the episode stretches credibility after Clark drops that safe on his car. So you're telling me he somehow talks his way out of having this incriminating evidence right there in his hands, then has someone killed, plants the body and the murder weapon on the Kent's property without being seen all in one night? That's all pretty convenient, don't you think? And now let's jump over to the scoreboard. For the first time ever, we have no Kryptofreak this week. We do have a car crash when the bus hits Clark. By the way, one of the coolest effects in the first season. We've got one instance when somebody walks away from somebody else angry. That's Chloe when she storms off after Lana is just trying to help. We have one instance of Clark in bullet time when Phelan is shooting him. And we have one instance of a bad guy dying, but not in a fight with Clark. He's shot by the cops after Clark runs off. So we actually only have 3 things to count this week. I'm giving Rogue a 4 out of 4, finally breaking out of the formula and doing it well. Was there an item I missed in any category? Send me a personal message on Geekvolution on YouTube, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.